Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for joining me. Artist Series at a Distance. Oh, I enjoy this so much because I get to step into the world of all these great artists. And today, the best, Brian Hardgroove. This is so great to have you here. Thanks for joining us.
Great to be here, Dom. Thanks, man.
Brian, I got to start. The story, Hardgroove.
Yeah.
How did this evolve?
It's a beautiful story. I posted something about it on social media yesterday when I knew I was going to do this. A very good friend of mine, he was a bass player for Meatloaf back in 1985. I happened to be in London when Meatloaf was going on tour. And so I took the tour bus down to Brighton, England with them, saw the show at the convention center, met one of the most brilliant musicians named Paul Jacobs, who was Meatloaf's music director and keyboard player. And we hit up a nice friendship. It was great. It was awesome. Took a break in the tour. Everybody came back to the States. And I ended up doing sessions for this bass player. His name was John Golden. He was doing sessions for Polygram. And he hired me to play drums on some of his demos. And I made some adjustments in the groove of one of the tracks he was working on. He said, "Oh man, that's incredible. That's incredible. No, Hardgroove. That's what I'm going to call you, Hardgroove." And I just it stuck with me. And as the years went on, I ended up trademarking it.
Let's go back to the beginning when you were young. What got you involved with music, and how did you discover the instruments you wanted to play?
It was, we talk about the moments when we have an epiphany. And I had an epiphany at 14 years old. I won tickets. I grew up in New York City, on Long Island, in Queens, Hollis, Queens, to be specific. I won tickets from WWRL, 1600 on your AM dial. I won tickets from Frankie Crocker to see Earth, Wind & Fire at Nassau Veterans Memorial Coliseum, one of the best arenas in the country to play in. Alex Lifeson told me that. I think Getty said it was really great sounding, but Alex said he remembered that place sounded really great. So I won tickets to see Earth, Wind & Fire in their first arena tour. That was 1974. And at that time, I wanted to be a police officer. I was standing in the middle of the arena, had good seats, and I was surrounded by all these people of different races, different financial positions. It was very clear. And what was really important is I went to all white schools most of my school career. So I was back in a very white environment, where the Coliseum was. And there was tension there. But in that environment, everyone was there and the vibe was incredible. And Earth, Wind & Fire was doing that to everyone. And I said, then I see it like it was yesterday, I want to do that. I can do that. I'm going to do that. And that's how I came to music as a calling. Other than that, and to this day, I consider myself just a music lover like anybody else. But the calling was very specific due to the power that music has to change and to move people in a good direction and better directions. And I thought a career in law enforcement would be useful, but I realized that the power of music was far superior. So that's how I came to it as a calling.
At a young age, to hear Earth, Wind & Fire, and believe it or not, I live on Long Island. Mm-hmm. I've heard Earth, Wind & Fire so many times at the Nassau Coliseum. Mm-hmm. I think I might have been there in 74 because
probably.
It was what was amazing about it. When you heard Earth, Wind & Fire, their performance sounded exactly like the album. The sound was so clear and so, it just kind of sucked you in. So you discovered your calling there. Mm-hmm. So what was the next step? You come out of it now, you're inspired. How'd you start getting involved with playing an instrument?
Yeah, it took a couple of years for it to actually click into a real specific movement. At that point, I told my parents that I said to my parents I wanted to play the bass guitar. I was attracted to the bass guitar. And I think it was primarily because my brother had an interest in bass guitar, and it was a passing interest for him. So it was sort of like trying to follow him. But that was a focus, and he dropped it really quickly. I told my parents I wanted a bass guitar. My mother, being a pianist, was wise enough to say, okay, I'll get your bass guitar, but you need to learn an accompanying instrument first. Mm-hmm. So she said, so you're Long Island, you probably know Benjamin Cardozo High School.
Yes.
Cardozo High School?
Absolutely.
Cardozo had summer programs, music programs and other things. You didn't have to be a student in the school to attend. So they had some summer programs. My mother said, well, you pass this 9-week guitar course, and I'll buy you a bass guitar. I did a great recital. Apparently, I don't remember it. And then they took me to Sam Ash on Long Island. Where was that? Fulton?
The original one was in Huntington.
But there was another one.
It was in Hempstead.
Sam Ash and Hempstead. Yeah. Took me to Sam Ash and Hempstead. And there was a choice between we're going back here. I'm sure you remember. There was a choice between buying a Carlo Robelli copy of a Precision or buying a real Precision. Yeah. A real Precision was like $221. I remember that because Joe Frazier weighed 221 pounds and he had a fight coming up at that time. Or buying a Carlo Robelli, which was just as good as the Fender. And it was $100 less. Mm-hmm. So they bought me the Carlo Robelli. And the rest was, I would say history, but it was more hysterical. Historical. But that's, and so I got my first instrument then. But in that time, I was playing drums at that time. I had my first professional experience. It turned out to be professional because I ended up getting paid something for it. But my first live performance in front of people I didn't know was at a July 4th event somewhere in Forest Hills. A friend of mine who actually, some people here might know, his name is Kenny Lee. He was Russell Simmons' driver for years. I was his roadie for that gig, and he was late to the gig. I had his drum set up. The people who hired him said, look, we have to start. Sun's going down. It's July 4th thing. They wanted to get the party started. So I started playing the drums. I started playing maybe the first 5-6 tunes. Then Kenny showed up and finished the rest of the gig. But that was my first live performance. It was all actually on drums, although my career has been primarily the bass. What
gave you the confidence to hop on the drums? Had you played them before? Had you taken any lessons?
I had been playing. We had jam sessions in our neighborhood. I grew up in Hollis, Queens. Yeah. And there were jam sessions in the neighborhood. As a matter of fact, Weldon Irvine, who is a very, very well-known pianist and a mentor to a lot of us, he used to do workshops literally around the corner from my house. I sat on those stairs, the basement steps, and watched him do workshops. And the people who used to go to those workshops, and I don't know if I actually saw these guys in the workshops at the time because they weren't famous at the time. Yeah. But Marcus Miller was a student of Weldon's. Lenny White. I know I didn't see Lenny White because Lenny White and I are friends now. Barry Johnson, Don Blackman. So, but that was like a high-end thing that was happening in the area. But everybody who was a musician had jam sessions in their house, in their basement, or in their backyard. So I had the confidence to play. I'd learned to play. I'd learned to play from Kenny Lee and other people. Another really powerful drummer in the neighborhood named Greg Lattie. I used to go to jam sessions with him playing bass, but he was like one of the greatest drummers of that area. But I used to play bass with him. He used to take me to we go to jam sessions with Graham Haynes, and guys like that. And, but the drums, I knew how to play. I didn't just jump up there to fill in not knowing how to play. I knew how to play. The confidence was just because I had to, screw that confidence up. I had to get it up at that moment because they said, we need you guys to play. And I was the only one there who could play. So I got it and played.
What a wonderful story. So here you are now, you get a taste of playing live in front of this audience, and the calling just got notched up to a higher level. At what point now did you start looking at this seriously to start getting together and playing with musicians and turning this into a profession?
Well, I think like a lot of people, and I think I've heard people say this in your interviews too, you do it under the circumstances that present themselves. And the next thing you know, you're doing it. Next thing you know, you're getting paid, or you're getting paid for the third time or the fourth time, or the money is better, or you got a call from someone that you only read about on record albums, So for me, it really was a matter of waking up one day, and I can't even identify that day, but waking up at some point in my life, realizing, oh, I am a professional. So the calls got more intense. Now, I paid more attention to things that I was more focused on, for like Public Enemy, for example. It was a group that I completely admired. And I know I'm jumping ahead here, but I completely admired that band. So getting the call to join that band, that doesn't happen to many people. So that was a big deal, but we can get to that.
Was huge. Public Enemy was huge and still is. And it was amazing that you had that opportunity. So where did that kind of fit in? Were you already playing and you had your career somewhat organized in a way?
Yes. I'd been doing quite a bit of interesting work, and I can't even remember all the stuff I was doing at the time, but there was activity happening. And I'd come back from a Japanese tour with a band. I was based in New York, and we did a short run of shows in the New York area after that Japanese run. And a gentleman on Long Island, there was a club called Fast Eddie's. The band played there, and a guy named Kyle Jason, who was signed to Chuck D's label, he saw that band. He saw me, and he was looking for a bass player for his band because he was recording or just finished recording his album for Chuck D's label on Columbia. He reached out to, apparently, from what I heard, a lot of people to try to find out where that band I was in came from. And he reached out to Bruce Mack, who at the time was the president of the Black Rock Coalition. And Bruce Mack and I had been putting on projects at the Hammerstein Ball, which is now the Hammerstein Ballroom, Manhattan Center Studios, which I worked in for years. We were doing events there. Bruce contacted me. I was doing a session for somebody, I think another Japanese artist. And Bruce came to the studio. He said, "Brian, this guy, Kyle Jason's looking for you. And he's got to deal with Chuck D." I said, "Chuck D? Chuck, that's my man, PE." So we met, Kyle and I met, really cool cat, great singer. And I joined his band to tour. It wasn't really a tour, a substantial tour, but it was a three or four show run opening up for Frankie Beverly in Mays. We did that in the Midwest. That's how I got to know Kyle. And that's how I got to meet Chuck. And then Chuck witnessed me doing other things and seeing how I do business and deal with people when he wanted to expand Public Enemy, take it to another direction, reinvent it, as in a way. He called me and said, I said, B, and then he didn't call me B at the time. He said, Hardgroove, would you be interested in being the bass player and band leader of Public Enemy? And I said, well, let me think about it. Yes. I remember that like it was yesterday. And Chuck and I had done some things prior to that already, but that's the moment he asked me to join Public Enemy. And yes, so to answer your question, yeah, there were things going on where he was able to see me in a light that he realized he could use. And the same thing happened with Bootsy. Bootsy saw me working with Public Enemy. He saw how I worked him into Public Enemy for one or two performances we did together. And then he asked me to join his administration and his team. And so I did both. I did those two for at the same time for a while.
So what influences, who were you listening to around that time?
To be honest, I was listening to the same people I was listening to 20 years before then, and the same people I listen to now. For inspiration, I always listen to Tony Williams, the Ohio Players, Earth, Wind and Fire, Jeff Beck, Gladys Knight, it's a wide range of things I listen to, people I listen to, and I listen to those things for inspiration. And if I have to do something that's specific in genre, or something that's specific, because I produce as well, if I have to do something that's specific to a time period or like right now, well, then there are contemporary things I can listen to. But those contemporary things are not my source of inspiration because not much of it embodies what inspires me, although a lot of it is great, but it's nothing I haven't already heard. So I go to the sources, and those things, people like Ray Charles, his voice, those things truly inspire me on a vibrational level. So that's the literal answer to your question of inspiration.
Well, this is a very, very good point. And the people that listen to these interviews, Brian, it's so interesting because as you're mentioning these names, I always want them to pause this recording of this interview and do the research who these names were and are. Because I mean, just from a drumming standpoint, when you mentioned Tony Williams, I mean, that's deep right there. What other drummers were you kind of influenced by also?
I love that question because the reason drummers are inspirational will then explain my answer. When a drummer's conversation in their genre is different than his contemporaries, that moves me, provided it's a conversation I like. So with Tony Williams, to me, I don't want to sound silly about it, but he's more than a drummer to me. He's a force of nature, but his conversation, I understand it. I feel like I understand why he played what he played, why he followed it up, how he led into it. And I only met him once. I got him to sign my Lifetime album. That was great. The Believe It album. But his conversation is so consistent and so explosive and so completely where I'm coming from that he is my favorite musician on any instrument. Now, the drummers who inspire me, and it's in this order that I came to them: Diamond Williams from the Ohio Players, who's a good friend, and is a real sweetheart of a cat. When you listen to Ohio Players records, particularly from Skin Tight to through Mr. Mean, that's from like 74 to 77, they put out a firestorm of music and they had massive hits. When you listen to those tunes, and they're funk, soul, dance tunes, the things that he gets away with, that doesn't affect your groove. Now, a lot of it has to do with how those records are mixed and how the drums are in tandem with the bass. You're dancing to the bass as much as you're dancing to the drums. So the mix had a lot to do with what he can get away with. But his conversation in those tunes, it's a very different conversation he has on drums. That moves me. He was the first one to get under my skin. Then it was Tony. Then it was Copeland. No, that was Lenny White. And then it was Stuart Copeland. The conversation, and now with Lenny, I talked to Lenny about this. I said, and I told him, this is what I think. I said, I think the reason Return to Forever was so much more successful than the other bands that were in that space, although they were all great bands. It wasn't a bad one in the jazz, rock, jazz fusion genre that I know of. It's because ultimately he never denied the audience the backbeat. Either he played it or he implied it, or the group implied it. I said, so that's why so many people who weren't necessarily into that kind of music gravitated. He said, yeah, you're right. And then he had an additional explanation. That's Lenny White. He's got a lot to say about a lot of things, and he's the guy you want to hear from for sure. With Copeland, his conversation in The Police was revolutionary for American pop music, but it wasn't the drums only. It was Sting's lyrical approach. It was the harmonic approach that Summers took, certainly by the time they got to the second record and all of that. But his conversation was very different for pop music. He got away with things that were great. And as much as I love the records, Stuart Copeland live during The Police days, oh my goodness. Diamond Williams, Tony Williams, Lenny White, Stuart Copeland. Those are the guys that really get under my skin in a good way.
Boy, that really is a diverse, influence that you pulled in from. And if you think about it, around that time in the, mid to late 70s, there really was some great music that was being pushed ahead at that time. That was, I don't want to say experimental, but the musicians had the courage to try things that were different.
Yes.
And it was exciting.
Yes. Yes. I asked Jack Douglas about, Jack Douglas, producer. I asked him about that. I said, Jack, what happened in 1976?
Yeah.
I said, everything exploded in 1976. Music was coming together in ways that had been leading up to since the late 50s. And it converged part of his explanation was, yes, it was that people were not segregating the music as much. Musicians were getting together more, although radio then started to get really segregated after that. But that's another conversation. But the musicians were doing powerful things. And what he pointed out specifically, he said FM kicked in at that time. So the music that people were making, they were then making it on another level too. The messages were great, the arrangements were great, the fidelity was incredible. And then you got guys who were like really paying attention to fidelity, like Page, Jimmy Page is famous for that. Yeah. Then those efforts were rewarded by, now I can hear it come back. So there was inspiration musically, socially, and technically, and that was just a really good time. It was a really powerful time.
Did you have a mentor or different people that mentored you? Were there people that guided you along the way that you just trusted and you knew the advice that they gave you was profound and then you applied it? Who were they?
I'm really glad you asked that question because it gives me the opportunity to say what I think everyone needs to hear. My life is a team sport. That's how I like to refer to it. I haven't done anything by myself. I can write the most incredible whatever. I may think it's incredible, but I'm always going to want to hear somebody else interpret it. So then those people are doing better than I could do on my own. So, I mentioned Weldon Irvine, and I really encourage people to look him up. Weldon took me under his wing, not just as a musician. He took me under his wing as a man, okay? He became an older brother to me. So he told me things about the world that I needed to know as a man, So anything he said about the world was easy to put into the music part of it because there's really no separation for us, So Weldon Irvine, absolutely. Eddie Kramer is like an uncle to me. Okay. I'll probably call him after this interview. We've done a couple of really powerful presentations at NAMM. Eddie produced a band of mine back in the 90s. And the band was called The Ancestors. That was the band I was talking about earlier when I met Kyle Jason. And there was a conference called the Empire Music Conference up in Albany. And I went up there. The studio had a bus, so I went up there. And I heard Eddie Kramer had visited the bus. I went to the bus, and people were going through it, looking at it. It was a recording tour bus. And someone said, "Oh yeah, Eddie Kramer just left here." I said, "Eddie Kramer?" And he said, "Yeah. You heard of him?" I said, "Yes, haven't you?" And now this is before the internet. So at that point, I still didn't even know what Eddie looked like. I had seen pictures of him, but he was much younger. I said, "Well, which way did he go?" It's like, what was that cartoon? Which way did he go? Which way did he go? I said, "Which way did he go?" And he pointed, and I just made a beeline in that direction. Fortunately, somebody had stopped Eddie for a conversation or autograph or whatever. I introduced myself to him. He took a liking to me. I said, "Yeah, I'm up here with the tour bus." He said, "Really? Okay, great. I'll come back and we'll talk." He came back. We exchanged information. He got hip to the studio downtown, Manhattan Center Studios, and he offered to produce the band. He did. At that time, he was finishing his first Hendrix books. Hendrix book. It was him and Tom McDermott, I believe. And I was in the studio doing some overdubs with Eddie. Warner Brothers sent over a first print for him to approve the cover and all that stuff. He gave it a look over. And then he looked at me, he said, and I kind of choke up to this day. He said, Brian, here, I want you to have this. He said, Jimmy would want you to have this.
Wow.
So he gave me the first pressing that was sent out in public to anyone. And so Eddie and I have been very dear friends ever since then. Jack Douglas, again, very dear friends. Now, these guys are historic figures, okay? Their history, people look them up. If you don't know them, I'm going to guess most of the people who watch your show know these men. Yeah. And those two guys are dear friends of mine, and they have shared things with me that I continue to share with other people. And they've shared with me as men, just as guys, and the music part of it is easy to talk about. Do the right thing and you'll be fine. But they invested in me as people. So in that order, and there are many other people, but when you ask for mentorship in this wheelhouse, it's in that order. It's Weldon Irvine, Eddie Kramer, and Jack Douglas.
Beautiful.
No question.
Beautiful. Now that I understand more about your drumming influence, when I hear you play, your time and your rhythmical intensity really kind of has that drumming influence inside great bass skills. So who were the bass, influencers that guided you along the way?
Bootsy. Bootsy was the first one that got my attention as a bass player, as an individual playing the instrument. Him being the showman he was, and I just to a degree now, I'm sure he still is. Although he hasn't gigged in a while. It's just his character, his nature. So he got me as a bassist, and that's when I recognized, okay, that's a bass guitar, okay, and so for sure. When I then started focusing on a bass guitar as such, then Stanley Clarke was a big influence. But a whole lot of, he wasn't an influence as a player, really, because I don't play like him, and I never aspired to play like anybody, but I loved everything he did. So he was an influence. But the playing, if anyone influenced me as a player, it would have been in tandem with whatever drummer they played with.
Interesting.
But Larry Graham, Jamerson, Louis Johnson, John Paul Jones actually stuck out to me when I was younger because he played independent bass lines that made sense. Not to say that a lot of people didn't, but his bass playing was like the bass playing I grew up with in soul music for me. In the context of music, that was just banging. Led Zeppelin was one of the better, one of the more enjoyable hard rock groups, because basically they were a pumped up blues rock band, with a great singer. So the groove was there. Bonham had a really interesting lilt on his thing. And John Paul Jones, I love the way he played with him. But there's so many, I have to leave people out, but I'm just thinking of the people who come to mind as you're asking me,
Boy, this is so great. So now you hook up with Public Enemy, and not only are you playing bass, but now you're a band leader. So this takes a certain level of leadership responsibility. Where do you think you learned that? Even with producing, that takes leadership responsibility. Where did that come from? And was that something that you were aware of to develop? Did it happen naturally?
That kind of thing, you wake up at one point and someone points out to you that you're good at leading. I didn't sit down and say, I'm going to be a good leader one day. And I didn't recognize I was leading well until someone pointed it out to me. Now, Chuck pointed it out by asking me to lead. And now I know where he saw it. When I asked myself, well, why did he ask me? Then I thought about the things he saw me do, and I understood what he needed. And therefore, It made sense. And he needed someone that he felt he could trust, you know, because it was a situation that was already in play. It had already been working for years. So he knows he's asking someone to come into a situation that not everybody, maybe not everybody in the situation wants me in there. You know what I mean? They had a thing that was going great, but Chuck is a visionary. He wanted that band to be more than what it was. So when he asked me to come on, he needed someone who could translate that music, which was done in very unorthodox ways. He knew from work I had done with him prior that I would be able to not only translate Public Enemy's music in a live situation, because they apparently attempted it before, and it was a disaster, I heard. And so he knew that I could play that music and guide the musicians to play it, because you could not go up on stage, tune up to A440, everybody be in tune, and then play Public Enemy music, because there are aspects of it that are not perfectly in tune. There are rhythmic aspects about it that are fairly sideways, but all together work. Yeah. He knew from things he'd seen me do, he knew that I understood that production, and that I would respect that it had to be, you have to meet that production where it is, not say, well, that's out of tune, you got to play it this way. He knew I would not come to it like that. And I believe that's primarily why he asked me to do it. And, but he also had some sense of my temperament that I could weather the storm that is Public Enemy. Because being in that band was not the easiest thing to do. That's for another story. I mean, they're all great. I love them, but it was a task to be in that band.
I think what's interesting here is the lesson for the viewers to understand is the fact that aside from you having great musical qualities that was attracted to them, that you understood the instrument, you understood music, that level of trust came by where they just felt something from you as a person, that they knew you would be the right component for the band at that time for what the need was. I think that's an important thing for younger and this next generation to understand that, listen, as much as you develop the quality of developing your instrument, you got to develop yourself as a person to have that level of just feeling that people can trust you immediately and want to bring you into that situation.
If you take anything away from this interview, that's the most important thing. People have to have a sense that you're going to leave that situation better than you found it. I had that conversation with Patrice Rushen. We did an interview for NAMM a couple of weeks back, and that was one of the things we talked about on and off camera. And I got to believe that that's what Chuck specifically saw, that I would help more than any damage that I might suffer, or whatever, or any conflict that could come out of changing the band. It was worth it to take that risk with Hardgroove. He had to have thought about it that way, because Chuck he's a smart guy. I don't think he would have taken that risk if he didn't think it was a good risk.
Oh, absolutely. And you mentioned Patrice Rushen, who was a phenomenal artist herself. How did you get involved in Santa Fe University of Art and Design? How did that come about?
As I said earlier, I was playing with Public Enemy and Bootsy at the same time. Right. And I'd done tours with both bands at the same time. The chair of the film department of Santa Fe University of Art and Design, a great guy, his name is David Scheinbaum. He asked me if I would be interested in checking out a program he was developing called Artist for Positive Social Change. I said, sure. And so I sat in his office, we talked about it, and it was just a social thing. And he said, do you think Public Enemy would be willing to perform? So I asked Chuck, and Chuck was into it. I suggested to David, I said, David, I've seen Public Enemy leave a lot of dead bodies on tour, bands that opened up. I said, a lot of bands here in town are going to want to open up, and I'm going to get flooded with that. And I don't want to deal with that really. I said, Dave, what do you think if I got access to your music department and I just put together a band to open up for Public Enemy? He said, that would be incredible. And the concept was the band would perform well-known hip hop rhythm tracks, but the vocalists, the rappers would do their own lyrics. Mm-hmm. So people would recognize the music, but hear something fresh from the students. So, fast forward, we did it, had great auditions. It was just a phenomenal performance by these kids. It was in the tennis stadium of the school, so it was a great outdoor environment, although it rained, but the town turned out. It was beautiful. Public Enemy did a great show. Before Public Enemy played, Chuck and a couple of the guys came to me while the students were on stage. Said, "Brian, I heard you put that group together." We said, "What are you going to do with them?" I said, "I don't know. They're college students. I don't know what they want to do, but they wanted to do this." So this shows you how great of a job these kids did. So afterwards, the vice president and the president of the school came to me quite aggressively and asked me, "Would you be interested in being a full faculty artist in residence in this school?" I said, "Sure."
Well, this is huge, because this really adds a whole nother level of what you're about. I mean, performing, producing, recording, education. There's so many qualities that you are bringing to the table here. During this pandemic, when times are challenging and musicians are having a real hard time, you keep busy and active, and you are on fire. How are you adapting to all of this, and how are you making it all work?
I sort of, one aspect of it, I kind of lucked into, and I had the conversation when we spoke earlier. I was at my friend Wes Studi's house, but he and I were talking this morning about how the pandemic circumstances sort of kind of fit into our lifestyle. Okay, because he works from home until he has to go to Hollywood or wherever he has to go. I work from home because Santa Fe is a beautiful city. If people who haven't been here, it's a beautiful city. You got to see it. It's great. People here are nice. It's just a beautiful place to be. The reason it maintains that beauty and that quiet that I enjoy is because it's not New York, and I'm a New Yorker, born and raised. If I die here, they're going to bury me in New York. But I live on native land. Okay. My wife's Native American. It's very quiet. The closest house to me is like 2 football fields away in any direction. Okay. Yeah. So I work from home and have been working from home since I've been in Santa Fe, and especially since the 4 years I've been living where I live now. So I've been working remotely for years. So the pandemic situation hasn't really affected much of what I do, except if I have to complete something by going to New York or going to Los Angeles. But my studio needs, the vast majority of them are done at home. And then other things that I can't do at home, I do here where I am now. It's a studio called Kitchen Sink, which is a great studio owned by a very good friend of mine, John O'Manson, great songwriter. The conditions that have been created are conditions I've been working in already. Right. So I haven't found the magic pill. It's just drawn down around me, like nothing about it has affected the way I've been working for the last couple of years.
This part of this is the business side of this. Mm-hmm. How do you balance all the business stuff? How do you balance, keeping on top of people, calling people, answering emails? How do you organize all of that?
I just stay on top of everything. I make the phone calls. I take the phone calls. I don't have so much going on that I can't handle it. Sometimes it gets to that point, and I get slow returning calls or whatever. But it comes back to something that we're sort of touching on for most of this, and that is who you are as a person. Yeah. And I'm no angel, but I'm no demon. You see, there is only one requirement. There's only 2 requirements. There's no requirement to be an angel, but there is certainly a deficit in being a demon. Okay. Yeah. And people know that about me. They know that if you're going to deal with Hardgroove, the money's going to be right. Nothing is going to be, there's not going to be anything you don't know about that comes up later. And if he says he's going to do something, he's going to do it. And if he can't do it, but you want him to do it anyway, he'll do the best he can. And when people know that about you, then you stand a chance of surviving in times like this. When someone loses a gig and they got to call somebody, it's good to be recommended. When somebody says, oh, yeah, that guy could do the gig, but he's also really cool. He's not difficult, because some of the best musicians in the world don't work.
Yeah.
Okay. Because sometimes they're just not nice enough people. Yeah. And it kind of comes down to that at some point, if you're not already a household name, Well,
your spirit and combined with the laws of attraction are bringing you to people that really want to work with you because they sense the core of who you are and your core values. Mm. One of them is I want you to talk about From a Whisper to a Dream.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's a project it's an ongoing project. There's an attorney here. She's a very dear friend of mine. Her name is Talia Kosh. She provides services for musicians. And I met her through some function here, and we've become very good friends. So we put on a couple of events where we're just trying to give musicians here in Santa Fe and the surrounding area access to opportunities. One of the things we did was, I think this was a Whisper to a Dream event. I can't remember, but I have a very good relationship with Sennheiser and a lot of companies, but I have some really good personal relationships with Sennheiser, and I put together a contest with Sennheiser for the best songwriter to get a nice range of Sennheiser microphones and stuff for them to add to their performance gear. The idea for Whisper to a Dream was to bring those kinds of opportunities to a town that doesn't necessarily have them because we don't have a big music industry here, And so that was really good. And then Whisper to the Dream was an initial part of my project with Stuart Copeland in reaching out to artists, singers for this project. We're in the middle of, for a couple of years now, this project called Audio Rhythm Theory. Yeah. And we've recorded the music already. It initially started as a project that was going to have Chuck in it. But Chuck, at that time, started rehearsing, although he didn't tell anybody. And I wish he had told me because I would have made different plans at the time. I had to recover from it, but it turned out great. He said yes to it. So it was going to be Chuck, myself, Stuart, and I wanted another guitar player. Larry Mitchell came up and recorded some of the sessions, recorded 2 of the sessions in the beginning. We ended up revising that, and then it just came down to all the music is performed by Stuart and myself, and Larry has a couple guitar solos on it. But then Chuck started to rehearse what became Prophets of Rage. They were rehearsing Prophets of Rage when he said yes to Audio Rhythm Theory, but he wasn't telling me. And I'm like, okay. And then so one of the sessions up there, I'm up there with Stuart, and so I get Chuck on the phone, and I said, Chuck, so we're trying to, when do you think you can come up, whatever. And he was sort of hedging. And Stuart just hearing this because I have it on speakerphone. I'm like, oh gosh, come on, Chuck. And Stuart is like one of the coolest cats ever. Yeah. Okay. And he said, well, okay, sounds like you're not going to be able to do it. So we'll do something else. It was something like that, Yeah. I mean, he's just like a really cool dude. So I said, oh, don't worry, Stuart. I'll come up with something better. And so I brought to it a science fiction story that I had written 4 years before that. I reworked the story around these tracks. And then I wrote up, and this is really interesting. I wrote up this treatment, and I never knew how to write. I don't know how to write for Hollywood. So I wrote it up in ways that I thought people could read it and understand it. So I wrote it up really detailed. I sent it to Stuart. And he says something like, Brian, this is not a concept album. This is like a multi-million-dollar big tent science fiction movie. He said, I said, Stuart, I don't write science fiction movies. I said, let's just do a concept album, you know? I was encouraged by a dear friend of mine, Ron Brembry, and to all the P-Funk family out there, you know, all the best, you know, send love up to Ron Brembry. You know, we call him Brem. He passed away this year, late last year. Ron said, he saw the story. He said, Brian, send this to Overton Lloyd. Overton Lloyd, you know, P-Funk family in Overton. He did some of the classic, he and Pedro Bell, and I think it was some other person, but Overton did a lot of the classic Parliament and Funkadelic album covers. We got on the phone. He and I was on the phone for 3 hours. The very first time I ever met him. And he was just drilling me on how powerful this story is. He said, now I won't give away what the plot is, but he said, this kind of story changes things. And he asked me at least twice during that 3-hour conversation. He said, have you ever done this before? I said, no, I just had the focus to do it at that moment. So anyway, so it turned into this science fiction concept album that we're going to plug these tracks that Stuart and I worked on. And I had this grand idea of having musicians from that speaking the 5 biggest, the most common spoken languages, the most commonly spoken languages on the planet. If I remember correctly, I won't even try to remember because I don't want anybody to say, no, that's wrong. But the 5 most common spoken languages, I wanted to get one person from each language, where no matter where they were from in the country, in the world, to portray the 5 main characters in the story and throughout this concept album. So we started this contest, and the flood of just insane people that were reaching out, we had to turn the valve off. It was getting a bit scary. I mean, there were people who were stalking Sting, they were coming to me. I didn't know how to deal with that. You know, for all the time I spent in Public Enemy, I was dealing with Public Enemy fans. Okay. And there's some people who could be out there, but I was not prepared for the type of stuff that was going on. And Stuart didn't have to deal with any of that. I had to deal with it, you know, and I had to turn the faucet off on that because I had no way to deal with it. But A Whisper to a Dream was part of reaching out to that.
Well, this became probably the biggest audition in the world.
Yeah. I went to Barcelona. I was a keynote speaker at the Feature Music Forum, I think it was. And I discussed it there. And Billboard covered it, I think. But it was a big deal. It was just more than I could handle on the tip of really security. You know, I had nothing in place to deal with these people, you know, that was stalkers. I was like, whoa. So I'm like, okay, you could be in the police. I'll watch it. I'll watch it from the bleachers. I don't think I want to be in that bed.
You know, I've got to squeeze in talking about Fine Arts Militia.
Oh yeah.
What I love about it, and you were the house band for several years. For this is the ESPY Awards, the Excellence in Sports Performance Yearly Awards. This is huge. Mm-hmm. And you did it in 2003. Your first year was the largest viewed presentation worldwide. I mean, this was incredible. What was that like putting that together and just being involved with that?
Clarence Clemens, he was in declining health for a bit before he passed. Yeah. And as I understand it, his band had done the ESPY Awards the year before, and maybe the year before that too. But just coincidence. Chuck was going to perform. He was going to be a part of the ESPY Awards. Chuck's manager, Walter Leiphart, happened to be, if I remember the story correctly, as I remember Walter telling it to me, he was in an elevator with some production people and heard that the ESPYs needed a new house band because Clarence wasn't going to do it. And Fine Arts Militia was a band I formed with Chuck before Chuck asked me to join. well, it wasn't even really a band, but I put together some of my favorite musicians, some of my favorite friends, and we did a recording called Fine Arts Militia. And we thought maybe we'll do some live shows, and we did some high profile shows. Walter was in this elevator and heard that there was a need and said, I have a band, Fine Arts Militia. And they said, okay, we'd like to check it out. This is what recommendation is all about, you know? And Walter knew that putting me in this situation, he knew in the worst case scenario, I wasn't going to do anything bad, but it was good for him to be able to provide a solution. It was good business for him. And we became the solution. So we get the call. I got a call from the music director of the show, who I think was in Clarence Clemens' band, but he retained the group. He retained the band as musical director for the ESPYs. I got a call from him and said, yeah, can I hear the band? I said, just do a couple of demos and I'm going to hear the band. I said, okay, cool. I called the guys together. We went to a studio out in Belrose, Queens. And I said, okay, here's what we're going to do. This is basically TV music. It's about cues. Okay. I've done cues before. I've done them for a couple of films. And let's go into the studio. We'll groove on something. If I like it, I'll say, okay, let's stop. And then we'll roll the tape and record it. Everything, just 30 seconds, nothing more than that. We go and we do about 40 cues in about an hour and a half, or something like that. Great stuff. So I send him to the musical director. He was up in Connecticut. He heard it, loved it. But to this day, I suspect that he didn't think we actually did that. And the reason I think that is because of how he dealt with the band when he actually met us. And I've dealt with this a lot. Now I was touring and I was in Europe, toured Europe before there was a Public Enemy, before Public Enemy in any form was ever created. So I was doing music before, hip hop and rap became the thing. This guy sort of approached us and spoke to us as if we were like rap guys who didn't really know music. Okay. So what he did was he came down from Connecticut. He said, okay, I'd like to set up a rehearsal. And he came down from Connecticut with the music of the 40 tracks we did. I think we submitted half of them to him and he loved them all. He said, I'd like to do a rehearsal. He set up a rehearsal somewhere in Midtown. We show up and he plops out charts for the music that we sent him. And those charts were not right. 100% of it wasn't right, but that's okay. And we started to play the first track. Nobody's looking at the charts because why? We know what the tunes are. And we're playing it. And then we get into the next track and he stops the rehearsal. Now mind you, he comes down from Connecticut. He's paying for the time, or or ABC or Disney, because Disney owns them, was paying for the time. And he stops the rehearsal. We didn't play more than, literally, we didn't play more than 2 minutes. And he said, okay, cool. And he said, cool. And then he started talking about other things, like the particulars of the show, travel and all that stuff. And he realized that he realized that we recognized that he was trying to expose us. He was trying to expose something. The keyboard player, Victor Burks, one of my dear friends, he pulled up the charts and pointed to him and said, no, this is not right. What you wrote here is not right. This is what it is. So that was sort of a burn, but he burned himself, So we got the gig. We go up. We do a smashing job. We killed it. Jamie Foxx was digging where we were coming from. It was his first one. He came to us. We came up with some grooves with him. Everybody was on fire. It was just great. And And they called us back for 4 years straight. The only reason they didn't call us back the next year is because I made a stink about what we weren't getting. You know, there was some things happening that were not cool, and we tolerated it for 3 years. The fourth year, I brought it up, and they corrected it and then didn't hire us again. Yeah.
It's amazing the amount of connections and networking that you have. You know, we have all these musicians that are out there that are listening and listening to all the words that you're saying, which is so powerful. In closing, Brian, what would you say to this next generation and how they should be prepared to have a career in this crazy business?
Be prepared to give. It's not hard for us to receive, you know. When you give, it's not a closing door. It's a revolving door. Learn how to give, but also learn how to receive. Because this is about humanity. Anything I have to say that can be at all helpful is about humanity. It's not about music or the music business, because the stronger, the more advanced and the more useful your humanity is to people around you, then your chances of succeeding in whatever you're doing are better.
Yeah.
They're just better. So it's about humanity. And let me just share this one story real quick. When I worked for the university, they sent me to Lima, Peru to do a music workshop for one of their sister schools. Great school down in Lima. I had a full class for 5 days of 30 students. The first day was 30 students. The other 4 days were 31 students because somebody had heard about it after the first night and begged the administration to please let them attend, even though they weren't enrolled in the school. And it was, I forgot what I called it, the music as business, I think I called it. And I had students who wanted to be record producers, who wanted to be artists, who wanted to be label owners, who wanted to be managers, and something else. I think some other group of them wanted to be marketers or something like that. And so of the 31 people I had, it covered these interests. And what I do is I laid out my career from the time I started professionally, from that first show that I played drums on, through my time in Kelvin Bell's band, the Kelvinators, through my time in the Cucumbers, which is one of the greatest bands I was ever in. Please look them up. The first album that the Cucumbers made, I was a bass player on it. And one of the songs from that album was just debuted in the new Denzel Washington movie. Small Things, Little Things, something like that. That's over 30 years ago. But John and Dina, great folk. From my time in that band to my time in Kelvin Bell's band, Kelvinator, through Public Enemy, through Bootsy, on and on. I laid out how I got these gigs, how I survived them, how I left them better than I found them. After that, the kids waited for me after that. I lost my voice the second day, and I really struggled through it. But at the end of that last day, I walk out into the campus, and at least half the kids were there waiting for me. And they wanted to take a picture and really want to say thank you and say goodbye. So I get on the plane on my way back. I'm flying business class, whatever it is, with the seat goes flat back. You go to sleep. I'm not a drinker, but I said, I want to sleep this flight home. I had, I think, a vodka or something like that, an orange juice. And I reclined and I said to myself, in all honesty, and I have a wife and a 20-year-old daughter. And I said to myself, in all honesty, if this plane goes down, other than my family losing me and me losing them, I have done what I was supposed to do. Because all of the investment that I got from these people, all these people I've mentioned in the course of this interview, I was able to return as much of that as I humanly could to these students that wanted it. They really wanted it. And I was able to do for them what had been done for me. And I said, I have done what I was supposed to do. I passed it on. And when I actually verbalized that, I realized that really was a closing chapter in my life. Yeah. And so now I'm at the next thing. So it was about giving. So we all want to get somewhere, but start by giving something. That's what I want to say.
That is so powerful, Brian. And I got to tell you something. You hit the nail on the head as far as just the spirituality and just the giving nature that you have in how you speak and how you play music. But whether you're recording, performing, touring, producing, teaching, writing, listen, you got a lot that you have, pushed yourself to, and you have raised the bar, and you continue to raise the bar in all these areas. So for that, we thank you so much. The Artist Series at a Distance, the sessions, we love what you're doing. We are inspired by what you're doing. We thank you so much. Stay well. And I look forward at some point to getting together with you in person.
I look forward to it as a fellow New Yorker.
Dom Famularo here, the Sessions panel. This is so exciting. Thanks for watching. Thanks for subscribing. Click the subscribe button to be a part of what we're doing. The views help us tremendously. All of your comments, we read them and react to them. This is incredible. The support you're giving us is great. The Sessions panel, we'll see you real soon.